thrilled to share the screen with Jes Bailey, founder of Crowdfund 360, and the one who is currently working as a consultant in this field. Thank you, Jes, for being with us today. On the other side is Miloš Milisavljević, founder of Strawberry Energy, which is one of the most prominent startups in our network, and also the leader of a successful crowdfunding campaign. Thank you also, Miloš, for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice. Okay, before we jump to discussion, I'd like to say thank you to Swiss Entrepreneurship Program also for their contribution in the organization of today's event. And I will also remind all of you who are with us today to ask your questions, to post your questions in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. Okay, so a question of many people's mind is what exactly is crowdfunding and how does the startup know if crowdfunding is the right strategy for them? So maybe we can start with this question.
Sure, do you want me to answer it?
Yeah.
So crowdfunding is the process of funding a specific project from money coming from as many different people as you can in a particular time frame. And that time frame is really important because we've all got friends that promise to give us back money and then it never really happens. So that's why we really need a deadline. It's not for just general funding day-to-day costs. It needs to, again, be for a specific project. Whether or not startups know that crowdfunding is going to be good for them, well, I think that depends on whether or not they just want the money or whether they want the holistic side effects that come with a successful crowdfunding campaign. So for example, if you just want the money, I tend to tell people not to bother crowdfunding because it's a lot of work and a lot of effort. But if you want to grow your audience, if you want to get new customers, if you want to get more press coverage and really heighten the awareness of the work that you're doing, then I recommend crowdfunding for startups.
Would you like to add something, Miloš, or?
Actually, I quite agree with what Jes said. Basically, even though crowdfunding probably is a little bit wider topic where it doesn't have just to be a startup financing, it can be also any kind of project. So I can maybe just add on a few points from a kind of a fundraising, startup like company fundraising on a crowdfunding. It's also not necessarily the best option for you. So raising money in general, you always have a couple of options. You can go to the angels, you can go to the institutional investors, you can chase any kind of like project money or any kind of funds, or you can go on a crowdfunding venture where basically you're offering anybody there in the world to invest smaller amounts so you can cumulatively have something more meaningful. And it's not as easy as it might looks like. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of preparation. So it's definitely not the easiest way, but as Jes said, if you need more than the money, if you need money, but you also need visibility, you need promotion, you need maybe to grow your customer base or to just like create a PR, then it might be a good option for you.
Okay, if we look just in the UK alone, there are over 100 crowdfunding platforms. This includes different models from, I don't know, equity donation, mixed models, etc. So how does the startup go about choosing which one he will use for his campaign?
Okay, great question. So first up, you need to decide what type of crowdfunding you're doing. Is it donation-based crowdfunding? Is it rewards-based crowdfunding? Or is it equity or debt? So once you've figured that out, obviously you've then cut the number of platforms. Then the key things to think about with platforms are, first up, does my audience trust and know this platform? Obviously, you're probably watching this webinar, you probably know about Kickstarter, you probably know about Indiegogo, you probably don't know about Unbound. So if your audience doesn't know about a platform, they're never going to trust it and give them the credit card details. So for that reason, you want to choose a well-known platform. Equally well-known platforms, they've probably had a lot of investment, they've had a lot of successful campaigns on them, which means that they've got better back-end marketing technical elements. You can see whether most of your backers came from Facebook or Instagram. If they're not coming from one of those, why are you wasting your time doing the marketing on that? You can see whether or not your emails are converting. And of course, they've got their own networks which you can reach out to too. So that's a really key point. The other point that I always think about is, again, where do your backers come from? If you're doing a really localized project, then don't use one of the global platforms, because you're going to be like a tiny, tiny fish in a huge ocean, raising minuscule amount of money, and they're just not going to really care. But in actual fact, for that thing, you'd use a local national platform where, you know, you're a slightly bigger fish in that sea. So that's a really key thing to think about. The other one to think about is their reputation as a platform. So anyone who's ever attended any of my workshops or talks before know that I will automatically say, don't use GoFundMe. GoFundMe has a reputation of so many scam campaigns. It has, you know, people are raising money for themselves, for their medical bills, for things that don't even exist. If you've got a legitimate business, you don't want to be next to that. So Strawberry Energy chose Crowdcube. It's got a really strong reputation in the UK. It's got really good back-end marketing elements. It's got a good network of people already that want to invest in organizations. If they'd have chosen a new platform that people don't know about, that, you know, has never run a crowdfunding campaign before, chances are they wouldn't have done so well as they have done.
Okay, Miloš, how have you made your decision when it comes also to model of crowdfunding and the platform itself?
So first, actually, you have to decide what are you fundraising for. So there are two types. Actually, there are a couple of more of them, as Jes said. But we did an equity crowdfunding campaign, which means we sold shares in the company to the people. So it's not an IPO, but it would be similar to some kind of a small IPO where ordinary people can buy shares in your company. So that's what we did. But we also had, for example, we had an option to go maybe to some kind of Indiegogo where you actually are pre-selling your product. So maybe that's right for you, because we are mainly B2B company. We were not targeting customers who would buy or sign up for a product in advance. So actually, we really just had a couple of options of a well-established basically platforms in the UK, and we chose Crowdcube because they're quite similar, to be frank. But Crowdcube was the easiest for us to cooperate with. They were most welcoming and most kind of proactive in supporting us. Even though it was a close call, and they also had an interesting option of, which is I think one of the we will talk about later, where they had a very interesting legal entity that they create for every specific crowdfund, that you don't end up with 5,000 small shareholders on your cap table, but they actually create one legal entity that invests into the company, and in that legal entity, they have all of the 5,000 smaller investors. So that actually you have just one legal name, one legal entity on your cap table. So that was, I think, the most important side for us to keep it simple and to have to manage too many small individual shareholders.
And do you have any tips on the amount to ask for? I mean, are there any like minimum levels of investment?
So in our case, and Justin can again give a little bit wider view, you can, I think that by Crowdcube rules, the minimum amount to invest is £10. And I'm not sure, is there a minimum amount that you need to raise? We set up originally 300,000 pounds as a goal. We reached that in like a day and a half or 2 days, and then we allowed additional 20% basically, which is 360K. And we thought about an option to actually try to avoid these small donations of 10 pounds or 20 pounds or these things, because then effectively these people are just kind of like playing around. But then we actually thought about one of the core reasons why we're doing that campaign. And in our case, it was not just about money, because we simultaneously raised the money from the institutional investors. For us, it was as much for the PR and rising awareness and establishing credibility in the new market. We were quite new in the UK back then, so we wanted to show ourselves to the wider audience. And in that regard, we actually didn't make sense to raise the bar. To, for example, set that 100 pounds would be a minimum, because we actually wanted to have as many small investors, because we consider them as brand ambassadors. As the people, regardless of did they invest 10 pounds or 1,000 pounds, they would go around, they would talk about Strawberry. When they see the smart bench, they would say, hey, I invested into this is a cool idea. They will take photos, they will share the photos, they'll basically raise awareness. And then we said, actually, we are not going to increase the minimum investment, and we left it at 10 pounds to basically enable as many people to invest and to have as many brand ambassadors as possible.
Yes, so just following on from what Miloš said there, an equity crowdfunding campaign always needs to raise more than 150,000 pounds. If it's less than that, it's really not worth the time and the effort of the platform or yourselves, really. So when it's lower than that, platforms often won't accept it at all. When it comes to rewards crowdfunding or donation-based crowdfunding, I always say don't bother unless it's going to be over £3,000, because again, it's so much effort. Now, the average Kickstarter campaign only raises £15,000, and that's because there are so many failed campaigns obviously out there. So the success rate on Kickstarter is only 34%, and it takes into consideration all of those that raise zero. So £15,000 is the average Kickstarter amount raised. In reality, rewards campaigns, when there's not a massive ad spend on them, tend to raise between 10 and 70,000 pounds. Any more than 70,000 pounds, and you're looking at considerable ad spend.
Great. Speaking of the amount, Miloš, you raised 360,000 pounds, and your target was 300,000, and you gave around 4% of equity, which means that your pre-money valuation was 9 million pounds. So can you tell us more on this valuation process? How does it work?
So the valuation process, I actually read a comment that somebody hear me really bad. It might be internet connection, I'm not sure. So I'll try to speak slower and hope that it will be better. So feel free, if you don't hear something, I'm happy to repeat it. So feel free to comment on chat. When it comes to valuation in an equity crowdfunding, the crowdfunding part is not really important. So you as a company, if you're raising for the first time, then you need to, there are a couple of ways you can establish your valuation. But after that, and this was not our first round, this was our maybe 5th round. And when you are in the later stages of your fundraising, you already have a track record. And then basically your valuation usually is a reflection of maturity, of revenue potential, of the risk of the whole adventure. So our valuation basically was based on our previous valuations, on our progress in between them, on our revenue expectations, and on our business plan. So the fact that you're doing a crowdfunding doesn't change that and shouldn't much influence, although people tend, because the majority of investors on crowdfunding platforms are not professional investors. They're usually ordinary people semi-professional or not completely professional, not at all experienced in investing. So it's more about some kind of emotional investing for the most part. And in that case, people tend to leverage that fact that they cannot be pushed back by serious investors, professional investors, and they increase the valuation, sometimes too much. And people usually, ordinary people usually don't care. So if you're investing £10, you don't really care if it's a valuation of a company 15 or 20 million pounds. That doesn't change much to you. Your investment is so low that you wouldn't care. While institutional professional investor will push you hard on every single digit of your revenue projections, cost projections, market share, and everything else in order for you to prove your valuation. So in our case, it didn't change much, the fact that we were doing the crowdfunding. It was basically just some kind of our growth as of the company. But we know of cases where people put in slightly larger or completely ridiculous valuations on a Crowdcube. But usually that's not a good strategy, because usually you will need to have additional round. And if you raise your valuation too much in the first round, then nobody else afterwards will want to invest again. So it's slightly easier to have a higher valuation, but it's not probably in the long term, it's not a good idea.
On that note as well, the crowdfunding platforms, I have seen many an occasion when the crowdfunding platform has told a startup that their valuation is too high and therefore they need to lower it. And another part on that is that, again, because quite a lot of it is emotional, but serious investors will take more consideration into the valuation. There is a situation whereby theoretically people assume that men have valued their company a bit higher than it should be, and a situation where they see women startup founders have valued it a bit lower than where it should be. So if you are a woman and you're going to run an equity crowdfunding campaign and you think your valuation is here, you can boost it up a bit, because people are already thinking it's going to be higher than what you've put it there anyway. So that's something to think about. And the platforms, they do provide some assistance on that.
Interesting. And doesn't that make the cap table very complicated? Because, I mean, you've got all of that people putting small amount of money, and there you've got to give equity each of those people.
So, as I mentioned before, in our case, that was not really the case, because the crowdfunding platform figured out that's going to be probably a major problem for the company to deal with a lot of different smaller shareholders. So they came up with this model where basically for every round, they establish some kind of new legal entity. They put all of the investment that you raise into that legal entity, and that small fund, small specific just for strawberry investment fund, in the end invests into your company. So legally, it's not a problem. And I have to say, on a positive note, that the whole legal process in our case, in the UK, we are a UK company. We do have a Serbian company as well, which is under the UK company. But we were doing crowdfunding as a UK company from the UK, majorly in the UK. And the legal side was very simple. It was easier than I expected. So in our case, the platform did a lot of job on our behalf of all of the legal framework, legal stuff, so that we actually, it was easier for us than I originally expected.
Okay, Jes, what are the biggest mistakes companies make during these campaigns?
Where do I begin? So, like you said, the success rate for crowdfunding campaigns is really low. And I think there are quite a few common mistakes. And let's just think about a couple of them. So first up, it's just the idea that crowdfunding is like free, easy money from a money tree. Whereas in actual fact, you know, if you go for a general investment or a general grant or something like that, you've got to persuade less people. With crowdfunding, you've got to persuade so many more people. So that's a really key point. And to be honest, why should they care? So really, I'd say a common mistake is going at it from your perspective rather than going at it from the audience's perspective. Always think about the audience. Why would they give you money? What do they want to support? And what do they want in return? And really thinking about that. Another common mistake is rushing the campaign. You know, maybe and hopefully at the end of this webinar, you're all super inspired to go and run a crowdfunding campaign. But crowdfunding is the same as any general marketing, sales, investment. You've got to go down a process of awareness, engagement, and then getting the money. You can't rush into it. Because the crowdfunding campaign is in a particular time frame, let's say 5 weeks, you've got those 5 weeks to get the money. But you have from today, you know, from the day you started your business to build up that crowd big enough and engaged enough, ready to launch. So Miloš hit your target, what, within 1.5 days, was it?
Yes, something like that.
Yeah, Miloš reached his target within 1.5 days, but there's absolutely no way he did that without any pre-communications with investors or pre-awareness that they're going to crowdfund, you know, and all of that takes place before you launch the campaign. So with crowdfunding, all the hard work comes before the launch so that you can smash your target on day one within the first week, let's say, and then go into your overfunding, because that's a much stronger positive PR message to push out there in the world. Another thing I think that is a common mistake people make when they run crowdfunding campaigns are to not really think about the project as a full entity. So thinking about it for the money, but not thinking about email, social media, PR marketing, and how much time that's going to take, but also not considering the actual financials of the project, creating the product, and then sending that out if it's a rewards campaign to the masses. There's a lot of campaigns that reach their target, but then the companies actually end up bankrupt because they didn't consider shipping costs or taxes to get into other countries. And obviously that's a terrible thing, really, and something you don't want startups to go through.
Great.
And I would also add that to just kind of put some light on the topic, it's all about preparation. In all of the case, of course, like before we went into our funding round, I talked with a bunch of entrepreneurs who raised money previously just to get a feeling about how is it. So it's a full-time job, usually for more than one person in the company. And in our case, I think it was a full-time job of maybe 1 to 2 months to prepare everything. And the hardest part, it's not, and I think it's probably never was the case that you just publish your video and the money starts falling from the sky. In almost every single case that I'm aware of, you need, and that's basically that when they prepare you, when the crowdfunding platform gives you kind of advices on how to run your campaign, they tell you that it's wise to prepare at least 1/3 of the money that you're looking for to be available for you on a day one, so that you actually quietly behind the scene, before you launch the campaign, you go out and you directly find investors who know you, who trust you, who actually commit to invest before you launch the campaign. So that on a day when you launch it, they can just register on a website and commit the money that basically you raised and agreed with them before. And even though that kind of a rule of thumb advice from the crowdfunding platforms is that in order to pick up, to have a good first day, you need at least 30%. the practice in reality, you need at least 60 to 70%. So, for example, when we launched, I think that we prepared. So we basically talked to investors, and we already basically raised that money. We didn't got it legally, but we got verbal commitments from these people that they will invest once we put a campaign live. I think that we were around maybe 180,000 pounds pre-arranged investment for the 300,000 on the day when we launched. So you need to do that basically without any help of the crowdfunding. The only benefit you get is that you have a launch date, so you have a deadline. So you need to work hard to prepare that, to force yourself and your team to raise that before you go live. And you need a reason. You have kind of a reason to go out and talk to any possible investor that you can think of and say, hey, we are preparing our crowdfunding round. Those are the terms. This is the investment papers. This is the deck. Do you want to invest? And then if they actually say yes, then you need to accumulate like roughly at least half of the money that you're raising. And I think that was true for every single person I talked to who had a successful crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, following on from what Miloš said, we always recommend a minimum 40% pre-launch. And if it's an all or nothing campaign, which equity campaigns are, we recommend 60%. So the examples I always give are, if you're looking at two restaurants next to each other, they're both serving the same food, and one looks pretty busy and it's only got a couple of tables spare, and the other one is completely empty and the waiters are looking like they've got nothing to do. Which restaurant are you going to go into? And you're going to go into the one that's busy, even though you know you're probably going to have to wait longer. And that's because there's that level of trust that having people in the restaurant has brought to that restaurant compared to the other one. The other one, you're thinking, why does no one care? Why is no one in here? And it's the same with the crowdfunding campaign. Having that 40%, that 60% in there already makes you feel, when you don't really know the campaign, like, well, you know, he's already got 50 people giving him 180 grand. Of course I can trust this. Whereas if not even his mum, or not even, you know, he's given any money, why should I care about this if no one else has? And that's the level of psychology that goes into the crowdfunding campaign, and why that money is so essential at that beginning stage.
Okay, one of the questions we have in the chat is, what's your thought on impact of equity crowdfunding to future funding rounds, where you aim to attract angel investors and VCs?
So I can talk from our experience. So I think in the early days of crowdfunding, it was, and to a certain extent, it might be still true, it was considered not very serious by institutional investors, especially VCs, because it was a competition for them. So as a company, as a founder, you need money, and usually you don't care where do you get that money. Is it a bank loan? If you're able, usually you're not able to get it. Is it an angel? Is it a crowdfunding, or it's a VC? And it's understandable that they're not happy about getting, VCs are not happy about getting competition that is less strict than they are, and that can steal piece of a cake from their own. I think lately it became more widely accepted. So the fact that previously was true, that if you fundraised, you're kind of marked yourself that you never can raise VC money. I think that's not true anymore, even though it looked like it might be true, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. So very successful companies that raise a ton of VC money are doing crowdfunding campaigns for the sake of extending marketing, PR activities, and growing consumer base. So in that regard, I think it doesn't affect much. Having a ridiculous valuation, as I discussed previously, if you actually go and put crazy valuation that nobody will buy, then you can actually make a very bad mistake. If you put evaluation reasonably, I think it will not impact your future investment at all. But if you go crazy and put a lot higher valuation that you can prove, then it's going to be harder to raise afterwards without having a down round, which is causing then a lot of other problems.
What Miloš says there is really true. One thing I can add from it is from a different perspective. So in actual fact, having a successful crowdfunding campaign can help you get future investment, future grant money or trust money, etc. Because in that one screenshot, that one website, you've proved that in 35 days, this many people gave you that much money, and you got these different PR media outlets talking about you. Now, the one good thing about that is you can't bullshit that, okay? There's no lying about that. Whereas obviously in pitch decks and in investor documents, things like that are taken with a pinch of salt as to how many customers you think you're gonna get over a certain period. So from that angle, a successful crowdfunding campaign does step you up a level higher than your competition in return for, let's say, that pot of money, if they haven't done a crowdfunding campaign. Equally, a failed crowdfunding campaign, or even worse, multiple failed crowdfunding campaigns, can definitely work against you, because crowdfunding platforms obviously have excellent SEO. So just typing in your name into Google, even if you put crowdfund or maybe not crowdfund afterwards, they're going to find those failed campaigns. And if you've got, 3 campaigns that all just bombed, then they're going to wonder, can this person not market? Is there not a need for their service or product? Why can't they attract money elsewhere? And that's obviously going to have a negative effect on your future financial opportunities.
I completely agree with Jes, because it can be very rewarding if you have a successful crowdfunding campaign, and it can be very tricky if you fail. So you should consider it very carefully not to fail.
Yeah, if you do one and fail, it's okay, because you can bounce back, because you can learn from your mistakes. But if you do more than 2, more than 3 that fail, it really delegitimizes your business in the world that's out there, unfortunately.
Let's have a quick glance at the issues of intellectual property. So how do companies share their vision while at the same time stay sure that there is ideas may remain safe?
So if we look at this one in terms of rewards crowdfunding, so when you do equity crowdfunding, you're usually further on your startup journey, and therefore obviously those legal elements need to have been protected already. A lot of people come to me with this question for their products that they're doing for rewards crowdfunding. They say maybe some factory is going to make them, really fast and cheaper before I can get mine out there. If you've not protected yourself legally, then yes, that's obviously a situation that can happen. But in reality, think how long it took you to come up with that. And there's probably other startups working on a similar thing. No one's coming up with an idea that's completely revolutionary. Think how long it's taken you to come up with it in terms of, whatever other business that's going to do that. And also think about your business more than just a product. You're a brand, you're a story, you're creating a community. Yeah, probably you can buy anything online on some knockoff website, but are you buying it because you just want it right now, or are you buying it because you're building and buying into that brand and that situation? A really good example I can give is there's a documentary called Capital C, and it's a crowdfunded documentary about 3 crowdfunding campaigns. Obviously one of my favorite movies ever. And they followed 3 guys in America. Now, one of them, he made this sleeve for a beer bottle that keeps the beer bottle cold. And he basically was making it out of his shed in the middle of wherever in America. And then suddenly Urban Outfitters, a huge American brand, decided to basically make the same thing, and obviously did it much faster on a mass-produced scale. His followers from his crowdfunding campaign and his business that he built up, like, attacked Urban Outfitters' Twitter feed, telling them about how bad it was that they were ripping off this, you know, solopreneur, small startup. And Urban Outfitters had to pull it in the end because it just wasn't worth the backlash and the PR. So that's a really good thing about crowdfunding, is you're not just getting customers that are going to give you money and obviously like knock off ones that steal your idea. That's what they're doing. You're going to get brand ambassadors that are pretty much loyal to you when you need them the most.
Great.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Also, you can watch a documentary on Netflix.
Okay, when it comes to campaigns, it is interesting that videos, which are under 5 minutes, they had like 25% more likely to reach their goal. Whereas also, when we look at some statistics, when it comes to the promotion of these campaigns, like the average Facebook timeline post has a conversion rate around 4%, which is pretty much similar with other social networks. And whereas email has an average conversion rate of 25%. So can you share more insights on this when it comes to the marketing side of one crowdfunding campaign?
So again, I can tell from our experience. So basically, in our case, the video is your most effective channel of communication. Of course, there are a couple of ways you can interact with potential investors. You can speak to them directly through email and Skype calls, but of course, you cannot do that too much because it will consume all of your time. So the video basically is your only mass channel for communication, and it's probably the most important one that will be consumed and viewed by the majority of people, who then, if you get them interested while watching your video, then they will either invest directly or they will contact you for more information. And it's usually the case that the larger investors will reach out directly to ask a couple of more questions. And the smaller investors will just invest directly after they seeing the video. So the video is probably the most important piece of your materials. Of course, you have your investor deck. You have a presentation with all of the projections and finance and everything else. That's also important. But I would say that's slightly less important than the video, because the video is the first thing they see. And if you don't impress them and don't get them interested in the video, they will not even look at the numbers afterwards. So in that end, you have, as a third line of communication, you have usually some kind of a public forum with topics and like public Q&A where people can ask you questions. And it's really important to stay responsive there and respond to everybody's question, and then everybody else can read your answers. So that usually also is probably the second most important piece of your focus and energy after you launch your campaign. And yes, actually the shortness of the video is important. Our video was 4 minutes and 25 seconds, and it was actually too long. I think, again, probably there is a lot of data that you can read about, but in our experience, I think that people's attention was roughly between 3 and 4 minutes. And it's the best if you can actually keep it close to 3 minutes. I think that's probably the most effective way, even though we were over it, we were 4:25.
Yeah, so following on from what Miloš said, for equity campaigns, the optimum length of the video is the 3 to 4 minutes. And for rewards campaigns or donation, it's 2 to 2.5 minutes. And the reason why it needs to be shorter is because at the end is when you talk about the crowdfunding campaign. So the longer it is, the less chance they're even going to get to the end where you talk about the crowdfunding campaign. Now, in relation to email and social media, thinking about your own habits, you know, how many social media posts do you see a day, and then do you actually ignore a day? versus how many emails do you get and do you actually open them? Are you more likely to open and engage with an email or with a social media post? Chances are it's the email. So people tend to see, even if it's a newsletter, they signed up for it, they tend to see it more as a personal connection because it's in their email inbox rather than just out there for the world on whatever social media platform. Another thing is as I've mentioned already, they need to go down this sales funnel. So seeing a Facebook post, that's great. They're aware of what you're doing. Then you need to ask them to engage with that post. And then you're going to ask them, you know, to give you the money for the crowdfunding campaign. If that engagement is to give you their email address, if you can't even get them to give you their email address, it's going to be so hard to get them to give you actual money. So before the launch of the campaign, spend time testing this, because if you're then thinking you're going to launch next week, but in reality, you know, only 100 people of your Facebook following are looking at your post and none of them are giving you their email address, and this has been the same every day, don't launch your campaign. Obviously, you're going to fail. When you ask for money, people tend to run away from you and ignore you. They don't suddenly come out of the woodwork like, hey, Jess, I'm here. Let me give you money. Mm-hmm. And again, it's the same with crowdfunding. So it's making sure that as many people as possible see your posts on social media and then engage with them, either giving you the email address, liking, sharing, commenting, because those people are now going to be the most likely to give you money when the campaign is live.
Okay, as we are now in these dubious times, we cannot to skip that question about going through this crisis. So yeah, some data from UK crowdfunding platform Seeders shows that community funding was 20% lower this March than in the previous years. So yeah, what do you think about crowdfunding in the coming days?
Okay, I can answer that one. So right now, I mentioned this yesterday. So right now is really an amazing opportunity for us if we look at it in that way. Right now is an amazing opportunity to build that awareness and engagement and build that crowd, which can be our community, ready for when things calm down again and we can launch a crowdfunding campaign. If we did this last year, and I told you to do all of this last year, you know, you'd feel as though you're personally losing sales opportunities and finance opportunities because you're working on that's not bringing you in any money. But right now, no one's bringing in any money. So it's a great opportunity to build that crowd ready for when crowdfunding is good again, when money from the general population starts to be a bit more stable. Yes, if you launch right now, it could be hard for your startup, but again, it depends on what you're doing. Right now, we're seeing that it's really good for what clients have I got at the moment? Educational games. Kids are being homeschooled everywhere. Parents are like, how can I make this fun? There's a board game to teach my kid about maths. Obviously, I'm going to get that. E-learning platforms, Meditech, you know, PPE, all of those, even some charities that are to do with situations coming out of coronavirus. Now is a good time to fund and fundraise for those situations. But for everyone else, take this opportunity to build that crowd, build that mailing list as large as possible, build that social media following as large and as engaged as possible. So as soon as things start to level out to whatever normality we see ourselves in, you're ready to crowdfund at that point, and you don't have to go and do all of this afterwards.
Miloš, how do you handle this situation in your company besides the crowdfunding campaign?
So yeah, it's a good question. So we are a product company. We are a hardware product company. So we had to work very hard to organize our production and R&D and all of the activities from working from home. We successfully actually did that after, I think, just couple of weeks. So majority of our team is working from home now, as you can see. And while our production team is working regularly, from our production facilities, where we, of course, enabled all of the health and safety equipment and everything else for them to be safe. So we adapted internally to the new circumstances, but we are going to probably see a slowdown in sales, slowdown in commercial activities of any kind, mainly because of the time of the uncertainty. So we are mainly B2B company and slightly B2G, business to government. So B2G sector probably will go silent for a while B2B, based on what we're working on, still probably will continue, just in a slower rate. So it's super hard to give any kind of expectations at the moment. Luckily for us, we had a good pipeline, so we are actually still producing and delivering benches. But all of those things were agreed and paid months and months before. So I think that as it is true for us as for majority of the economy, the hardest hit probably will not be right now, but will be a couple of months down the line. And this is a good time now for any company, really, if it's affected by this situation, to look for new opportunities, to try to see what is it that with their experience, with their expertise, they can change and offer to their clients that's going to be relevant in this post-corona time. And so, as with any crisis, it will be very tough on some, but it will be also probably a great opportunity for these more adaptive ones who actually find the new opportunities that will certainly arise from the crisis.
Okay, let's get back to crowdfunding campaigns. What happens when the campaign ends? How do you measure whether the campaign was successful or not? How do you approach your investors after the campaign, etc.?
So obviously the easiest way to see whether it's a success is whether or not you reached your target and that money is now in your bank account. Other than that, what we look at in terms of success were, before you launch the campaign, setting yourself goals. So did our mailing list increase by X% that we wanted? Has our social media gone up to whatever percentage in terms of like followers and engagement? How many press coverages did we get? Did we manage to get in any of the big online outlets? Looking at all of those, obviously, in terms of a success or not a success. And then in the long term as well, as using that crowdfunding campaign to bring you additional funding or awards, things like that. In terms of following up with investors and backers, really important. We do not want you to put all this effort in once and then like never be able to ask them for money again because they never heard back from you or where that money's gone. We really want you to be able to either turn them into regular customers, or if you run a crowdfunding campaign, get them to give again and buy, your next level of product if it's a rewards campaign. We recommend every 2 to 3 months updating them on the progress. We've sent our designs over to the factories. There's been an issue. The factories are closed because of these holidays. It's going to have to take a bit longer. We've started sending out. Everyone should now have their products. Those sorts of updates. And then also converting them over to your main mailing list as well, if they are rewards or donation backers, so that obviously they can be kept up to date with other elements of your business and what you do. But I'll let Miloš talk more about the investor angle.
Yeah, so basically, like with any other investor, once you get the money, it's basically not the end, it's just the beginning. And of course, probably the most important thing for you to do is then to focus on delivering things that you promised, because in the end of the day, that's going to be most important. Did you manage to succeed? Because like whenever you are raising money, you are raising it to reach some milestones, to reach some objectives, to increase your sales, to launch a new product, to expand to a new market. And probably the majority of your focus should go to actually executing what you promised. because that's going to be, in the end of the day, the most important metrics that everybody will measure you on. And of course, you shouldn't completely forget about these people, because then you are effectively wasting the potential of all of these possible brand ambassadors, possible all these communities that can give you good introductions, that can give you good advices, that can promote you. So even though that majority of your time, focus, and energy should be on your execution of your goals, you shouldn't forget your small, usually of course, small investors that invested into you. But also, probably it's important to say that you cannot answer to every single small investor that may be, because if you have 5,000 small investors, the chances are everybody will have something to ask. So however responsible you feel, you shouldn't spend too much time trying to kind of handle all of those things, because then it will consume all of your energy and time that you should actually do your job. But you should have some kind of regular reports, regular Q&A sessions, maybe once every 3 months. That's probably, I guess, okay. And then they can write you all of the questions they want, and then you can cover it, or you can have some kind of time and place where they can show up and ask your questions, but not to consume too much of your time as well.
Jes, how long should it take from one campaign until the next one?
Ideally, until you've spent all that money, delivered the project, and obviously given everyone a great experience, because otherwise, why would they theoretically give again? For a donation or rewards campaign, we recommend like max 2 a year, but really only like 1. If you're a charity, you might want to do one in like March, April, and then another one in November, because obviously Christmas donation giving is an important thing. But otherwise, really wait until you've actually succeeded in delivering what you were promised, because otherwise people are going to not have that idea as to whether to trust you or not yet. Equally, if you haven't delivered what you've promised and you've got an army of 5,000 angry people waiting for their product, again, probably not a good idea to go and run another crowdfunding campaign, because they're definitely not going to give to you, and they may congregate together for some backlash on your social media and your advertising. Really make sure you give everyone a great time, deliver the product, respond to any criticisms. Let people know that you're human and delays happen, but keep them up to date with this before it happens, really, so that when you launch another campaign, even if it was delayed, even if they, didn't get their product for 3 months after it was promised, they at least got that honest level of communication, and they understand that it's a risk and they're willing to take it again.
Great. We have one more question. How to attract funders in the crowdfunding campaign? I guess that we already answered this, but if you have something to add, now is the time.
Just really make sure that, if it's like investors and people giving you like larger amounts of money, like only target the ones that would actually care. Some investors only invest in tech. Some investors only invest in like fashion. Don't waste your time going after everyone. Be really strategic with your time. Like Miloš said, it's a full-time job, and you've got a business to run as well, and a life. So really be strategic with who you're going after, what you're asking, and why. And then obviously just create a great product, great marketing to go alongside it, and it's going to make your life easier.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of more specific I answer. It's pretty much raising investment like any other. So you are proposing what are you going to do, how much money you need for that, and how you're going to achieve that. And it's about getting people to trust you with their investment, regardless of is it £10 or £100,000. And you need to be proactive. You need to go to chase people, to kind of literally reach out to them as much as you can. through your connections, through all of your social media, wherever you can. It's pretty much, there is no any kind of shortcuts. It's just a lot of work.
Okay, one more question is, how much should you spend on marketing activities directly related to crowdfunding?
How long is a piece of string? I'd say it's pretty comparable to how much you want to raise, but equally, we've raised over £50,000 with absolutely zero spend. And that's because you've got to look into your own networks. If you've got a friend that makes videos, why are you spending money on a video when you can use them? If you've got, you know, social media marketing skills within your team and you've got time to develop a crowd, why are you spending money on that? Like Miloš said, there is no shortcut with crowdfunding. If you spend loads of money to build a customer base and launch your campaign in a shorter amount of preparation time, you're going to raise money, but you've just spent loads of money. So in reality, you're not raising that much. But if you don't spend any money and you spend time and build up a holistic and organic following, you're going to raise more in the long run. There's no right answer as to how much money to spend on it. It really just depends on what your starting point is and how much time and energy and people you've got to help you.
Okay, question for Miloš. Do you have something to add?
No, actually, I just want to share our experience. We committed 3 people from the team working kind of 7% of time on the preparation of the crowdfunding campaign, reaching out to all of the people, making strategies, making like all of the planning, all of the activities. We actually didn't invest it. So in terms of time and effort, we invested a lot in a way that like we committed 3 senior people from the team working almost full time on that. But when it came to kind of a cash, we just I think had one event, small event, and we created a video, which maybe we did it quite kind of like as I just said, we stayed wherever we were able to. So for example, instead of hiring a local crew in the UK to create a video, we actually find out that it's going to be cheaper to hire a very, very good people in Serbia, fly them to London, pay for their accommodation, pay for their work, and fly them back to Serbia and to create a video. And all of that was cheaper, for example, than hiring people in London, just because of and probably we got better quality people here than we were able to get there. So to give you kind of a feeling, I think we invested less than £10,000 total into it, and we raised 360. But that's, again, that depends on your nature of your product, et cetera, et cetera.
The question for Miloš is, does crowdfunding function in Serbia, and why not?
As far as I know, it doesn't work in Serbia legally in a way that Serbian companies, I think there isn't any platform, and there was few attempts to build one, but I think that some kind of regulation forbids it at the moment, and I think that a couple of people are working on it to change it. But that being said, that does not necessarily stop you from investing. So even though, so you can always register a company in the UK or somewhere else, and people from Serbia can invest. So even though that can also be kind of especially for a larger amount, it can be a little bit harder to deal with the banks and everything. But I think, let's say that maybe a third of our fundraising, of our crowdfunding round was from people from Serbia that we knew, that some that we didn't know back then. So basically, it's possible to raise money in Serbia, but in a way that you need to have like a EU or UK company, and then people actually can invest into it.
In order to add to that, from the rewards perspective, like Serbian businesses can use Indiegogo fine to crowdfund. but like most of your backers probably are not going to be coming from Serbia. So if you've got a product, you've got to think about the costs of exporting it either to European countries, UK, America, Australia, etc., where there is a target market that wants what you're offering and knows about crowdfunding. Because that's the biggest issue for rewards and donation-based crowdfunding in Serbia, is that people don't necessarily know crowdfunding. And also I think PayPal doesn't really work well. So that's another issue because you give a lot from PayPal. However, again, having a dual registered company works really well. So you can use Kickstarter if your business is registered in a country such as like UK, Germany, or a couple of other of the European countries. And then you can use Kickstarter. So there have been a lot of successful, sorry, there's a helicopter. There have been a lot of successful Serbian crowdfunding campaigns on Kickstarter, but because the country doesn't necessarily say Serbia, because the company is dual registered in another country that is allowed on Kickstarter, it's not necessarily obvious that that was a Serbian campaign.
Great. As we reached our timeline and as we have no more questions, I will use this opportunity to say huge thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Okay, thank you to all of you who are with us today. And we will have some follow-up email to reach to you after this webinar, and we will send you the link to Strawberry Energy crowdfunding video. It will be useful for you to see the successful example of one campaign. Okay, then what can I say more? Stay healthy and be with us on the next webinar. We will announce the next topic on our channels. Bye.
It was a pleasure. Be safe.